The fluorescent lights of Northgate High didn't just illuminate the hallways. They exposed every newcomer, every difference. For Jeremiah Brown, the only new black face in a sea of sameness, that light felt like a spotlight in an interrogation room. Whispers followed her like a shadow, and the stares of the popular crowd were as sharp as broken glass. They saw a quiet, solitary girl, an easy target for their casual cruelty. What they couldn't see was the iron discipline forged in 1,000 hours of sweat and pain, a secret strength coiled and waiting. They thought they were cornering a lamb clueless they were about to provoke a dragon. This is the story of how their vicious game of intimidation collided with a hidden truth, and how the karma that came for them was more devastating than any punch or kick. The U-Haul truck groaned its final complaint as it backed into the driveway of 1422 Sycamore Lane. For Jeremiah Brown, the sound was a punctuation mark at the end of a life she knew. Atlanta, with its vibrant chaos, its symphony of cultures, and the comforting familiarity of her Dragon's Path dojo, was now just a collection of memories packed into cardboard boxes. Her father, David Brown, a brilliant software architect, had landed a massive promotion at a tech giant headquartered in the Pacific Northwest. The move to the idyllic, almost eerily pristine town of Northgate, Oregon, was meant to be a new beginning, a step up. For Jeremiah, it felt like a step into a void. Northgate was beautiful in the way of a postcard, all manicured lawns, towering pine trees, and houses that looked like they were built from a single approved blueprint of suburban perfection. Her mother, Maria, a registered nurse with a spirit as warm as the Georgia sun she left behind, was already talking about joining the neighborhood watch and a book club. But as Jeremiah stood on the freshly cut grass, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crisp Oregon air. It was the silence, the homogeneity. In her old neighborhood, the world was a mixtape of languages, music, and aromas. Here, the only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower. Her first day at Northgate High confirmed her unease. The school was a sprawling campus of brick and glass, impressive and intimidating. As she walked through the doors, a sea of faces overwhelmingly white turned to watch her. It wasn't overt hostility, not at first. It was a pervasive, suffocating curiosity. She was a novelty, a specimen. She could feel herself being cataloged, tall, athletic-built hair, pulled back in a tight, bun-guarded expression. Her dad had given her the talk the night before. "Listen, Geordie," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm. "It might be a little different here. People might not be used to, well, to us. Just keep your head up, be yourself, and let your light shine. You've got nothing to prove to anyone." She also heard the voice of her sensei, Kenji Tanaka, a man whose wisdom was as sharp as his techniques. He had awarded her the coveted Shodan, the first-degree black belt in Shotokan Karate, just 2 months before the move. "The belt does not make you powerful, Jeremiah-san," he had told her during the ceremony, his voice a low rumble. "It is a symbol of your discipline. Karate is a shield, not a sword. You do not use it to show off, to intimidate, or to start a conflict. You use it only to protect, to defend, to end a conflict that someone else has forced upon you. The greatest victory is the one won without a fight." That wisdom was her armor as she navigated the treacherous social landscape of the cafeteria. She found an empty table in a corner, hoping to eat her lunch in peace. But peace was not on the menu. A trio of girls approached her table, their movements synchronized like a pack of predators. The one in the center was Brigitte Peterson. She was the undisputed queen of Northgate High, with blonde hair so perfect it looked synthetic, sharp blue eyes, and a smile that never quite reached them. Her power wasn't just in her beauty, it was dynastic. Her father, Robert Peterson, was a wealthy property developer, and more importantly, the influential head of the school board. Flanking her were Heather Mills and Tiffany Lang, two girls who seemed to exist purely as extensions of Brigitte's will. "Is this seat taken?" Brigitte asked, her voice dripping with faux politeness, gesturing to the empty chair opposite Jeremiah. She didn't wait for an answer, sliding into the seat, while Heather and Tiffany stood behind her smirking. "I guess not," Jeremiah replied, her voice even. She didn't look up from her tray. "You're the new girl, right from... where was it, Georgia?" Brigitte continued, drawing out the word Georgia as if it were an exotic and slightly distasteful delicacy. "Atlanta," Jeremiah corrected her, keeping her eyes down. "Atlanta," Brigitte repeated, a small, mocking laugh escaping her lips. Wow, that must be a big change from this. She gestured vaguely at the clean, orderly cafeteria. We're a lot quieter here. More civilized. The coded language was as clear as a siren. You're not from here. You're not like us. You don't belong. Jeremiah felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, the instinct to push back to challenge the arrogance. But Sensei Tanaka's voice echoed in her mind. The greatest victory is the one won without a fight. She took a slow, deliberate breath, centering herself, finding her inner calm. She simply picked up her sandwich and took a bite, refusing to give Brigitte the reaction she craved. Frustration flickered in Brigitte's eyes. Her first probe had been met with a wall of indifference. She decided to escalate. As she stood up, she accidentally stumbled, knocking her tray of milk forward. The carton tipped, sending a cascade of white liquid splashing across Jeremiah's black jeans. "Oh my God, I am so clumsy!" Brigitte shrieked, her performance of shock worthy of a drama club award. Heather and Tiffany giggled, barely bothering to conceal it. The entire section of the cafeteria fell silent, all eyes on the scene. Jeremiah looked down at the milk seeping into her pants. It was a classic juvenile power play, an assertion of dominance. Humiliate the outsider, establish the hierarchy. Slowly, deliberately, Jeremiah stood up. She grabbed a handful of napkins, her movements economical and precise. She didn't look at Brigitte. She didn't say a word. She just calmly began dabbing at the stain. The silence was more unnerving to Brigitte than any outburst would have been. "Hey, are you okay?" The voice came from beside her. It belonged to a boy with sandy brown hair and kind hazel eyes. He was holding out a fresh stack of napkins. He was cute in a clean-cut boy-next-door sort of way. Jeremiah recognized him from her AP chemistry class. Kevin Miller. "I'm fine," Jeremiah said, taking the napkins. "Thanks." "That was a jerk move," Kevin said in a lower voice, glancing at Brigitte, who was now watching them with a narrowed, possessive gaze. "Don't mind her. She just needs to be the center of attention." "I'm getting that impression," Jeremiah said dryly. Brigitte, seeing her scene being co-opted, snapped her fingers. "Come on, guys, let's go. We're going to be late for class." She shot one last venomous glare at Jeremiah before turning on her heel and stalking away, her two shadows scurrying after her. "I'm Kevin, by the way," the boy said, offering a small apologetic smile. "Jeremiah," she replied. "Well, Jeremiah," he said, "welcome to the Shark Tank." As she walked to the bathroom to clean up, Jeremiah replayed the incident in her mind. She had held her ground. She had followed her sensei's teachings. She hadn't let them get a reaction. But she knew this was just the beginning. Brigitte Peterson had marked her territory, and in her eyes, Jeremiah was an intruder. The milk was just the first shot fired in a war Jeremiah never wanted to fight. And as for Kevin Miller with his kind eyes and easy smile, she couldn't decide if he was a potential ally or just another part of the complicated, dangerous ecosystem of Northgate High. The initial incident in the cafeteria set the tone for the weeks that followed. Brigitte's campaign against Jeremiah wasn't one of overt physical confrontation. It was more insidious, a death by 1,000 cuts designed to isolate and psychologically torment her. It was a campaign of whispers in the hallways that would fall silent as Jeremiah passed, of snickers in the back of classrooms, of being pointedly ignored during group projects. Brigitte was a master of plausible deniability. In the hallway, Heather would accidentally swing her backpack just as Jeremiah walked by, knocking her books to the floor. In the gym, a basketball would randomly fly from across the court and hit Jeremiah squarely in the back. Each time it was followed by a chorus of fake apologies and barely suppressed laughter. Each time Jeremiah would calmly pick up her books or rubber back her face an unreadable mask and walk away. Her control was absolute, a testament to her training. In the dojo, she had learned to endure. She had held stances until her muscles screamed, practiced kata until every movement was ingrained in her soul, and engaged in kumite sparring, where she learned to absorb a hit, to analyze, and to respond with precision, not passion. The taunts and pranks of high school bullies were like gnats compared to the focused discipline of her martial arts life. But they were persistent, and they were beginning to wear on her. The digital front was open next. A fake social media profile, Jeremiah Wannabe, appeared online. It used a photo of her surreptitiously taken in the lunch line and posted cruel fabricated stories about her. Rumors began to circulate that she was kicked out of her old school for fighting, that her family was poor and living off government assistance, that she was trying to steal someone's boyfriend. The lies were as absurd as they were hurtful. Jeremiah's parents saw the strain. Her father noticed the quietness at the dinner table, the way her shoulders were perpetually tensed. "Everything all right at school, Jordy?" he asked one evening, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's fine, Dad. Just a lot of homework." She lied. She couldn't tell them. They had sacrificed so much for this move, for this better life. How could she tell them their new paradise was her personal hell? Admitting the problem felt like admitting defeat, like letting the bullies win. Kevin Miller remained a confusing presence. He would consistently seek her out, sitting with her in chemistry or catching up to her between classes. He was always friendly, always offering a word of encouragement. "Just ignore them, Jeremiah," he'd say after an incident. "They're just trying to get a rise out of you. You're stronger than that." His words felt supportive, yet hollow. He saw what was happening. He was part of Brigidy's popular circle, even if he seemed to be on the periphery. He laughed at their jokes, went to their parties. Yet he never once stepped in. He never told Brigidy or her friends to back off. He was a passive observer, a sympathetic bystander, and in Jeremiah's book, that was only a small step up from being a participant. His kindness felt conditional, as if it only existed in the vacuum of their private conversations. The situation came to a head in AP Chemistry, a class they shared with Brigidy. The teacher, Mr. Davies, was a timid man in his late 50s, more interested in his tenure than in classroom management. He was palpably intimidated by Brigidy, whose father held the school's budget in his hands. They were working on a delicate titration experiment requiring steady hands and precise measurements. Jeremiah was paired with Kevin. For a moment, things felt normal. They worked well together, their movements efficient, their conversation focused on the task at hand. They were on the verge of getting a perfect result. Brigidy at the next station with Heather was watching them, her eyes glittering with malice. She saw the easy rapport between Jeremiah and Kevin, and it was like fuel to her fire. As Jeremiah leaned in to read the final measurement on the burette, Brigidy made her move. With a theatrical "oops," she swung her arm back, knocking over a flask of potassium permanganate. The dark purple staining solution arced through the air, splashing directly onto Jeremiah's lab report, obliterating weeks of work. A few drops hit the sleeve of Jeremiah's white lab coat, instantly staining it a deep, ugly violet. "Oh, Brigidy, you are such a klutz." Heather chirped, the feigned concern in her voice an insult. The class went silent. Mr. Davies looked up from his desk, his face a mixture of annoyance and fear. "Brigidy, please be more careful," he said, his voice barely a reprimand. "It was an accident, Mr. Davies," Brigidy said, batting her eyelashes. The flask was just so slippery. Jeremiah stood frozen, staring at the ruined report. It wasn't just paper. It was hours of effort, of careful calculation gone. She felt the control she held so tightly begin to slip. The heat in her chest was no longer a flicker. It was a flame. Her hands resting on the lab table, curled into tight fists, her knuckles white. She could feel the power in them, the muscle memory of 1,000 punches. Kevin placed a hand on her arm. "Jeremiah, it's okay," he whispered. "We can do it again. Don't do anything." His touch was meant to be calming, but it felt like a betrayal. He was telling her to absorb it, to accept it, to be the bigger person yet again. He was asking her to swallow another piece of her dignity. She looked from the ruined report to Brigidy's smug face, and then to Kevin's pleading eyes. She unclenched her fist, forcing a slow breath into her lungs. She nodded curtly at Kevin, pulling her arm away. "Mr. Davies," Jeremiah said, her voice dangerously calm. "May I please go to the restroom to clean this off?" "Yes, of course, Jeremiah," the teacher said, relieved to have her out of the room. As she walked out, she heard Brigidy whisper to Heather, loud enough for her to hear, "See, she's not so tough. Just a coward." Later that day, feeling dejected and angry, Jeremiah was cutting through the less-used hallway near the music rooms to get to the gym for her own private workout. It was her sanctuary, the only place she could truly be herself. She would go through her katas, the air slicing with the thwip of her uniform, finding her center in the familiar patterns. As she passed the band room, she heard voices. Brigidy's unmistakable imperious tone, and another one, Kevin's. Curiosity piqued, she slowed her pace, pressing herself against the cool metal of the lockers, just out of sight. Was perfect, Kev. You saw her face, Brigidi was saying, followed by a giggle. She almost lost it. I thought she was going to swing at me. It wasn't cool, Brit, Kevin's voice replied, but it lacked conviction. It was the voice of someone trying to sound noble while being utterly spineless. You ruined her whole project. Oh, boo-hoo, Brigidi scoffed. She'll get over it. Besides, you're doing great. She totally trusts you. Did you find out anything else? Does she have a boyfriend back in Atlanta? Jeremiah's blood ran cold. The air left her lungs. No, I don't think so, Kevin said. She doesn't talk about her old life much. Look, I don't know about this anymore. It feels wrong. Don't get all moral on me now, Kevin Miller. Brigidi's voice turned sharp. You agreed to the deal. You get close to the new girl, feed me a little info, help me have some fun with her, and I make sure you get that summer internship recommendation from my dad. Your dad's landscaping business could really use that commercial contract, couldn't it? Don't forget who holds the cards here. A heavy silence followed. Jeremiah felt like she was going to be sick. It wasn't a dare. It was a transaction. Kevin's kindness, his sympathy, his welcome to the Shark Tank. It was all a lie. He wasn't a bystander. He was a spy. He was an active, willing participant in her humiliation, trading her trust for a recommendation from Brigidi's father. The betrayal was a physical blow more painful than any spilled milk or stray basketball. The bullies were one thing. They were honest in their malice. Kevin had been a serpent hiding behind a friendly smile. She pushed herself off the lockers and walked away, her footsteps silent. The heat in her chest was gone, replaced by an icy diamond-hard resolve. Sensei Tanaka had taught her that karate was a shield, but he also taught her that sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to let the person attacking you run headfirst into that shield until they break themselves against it. Brigidi Peterson and Kevin Miller had no idea what was coming. They thought they were playing a game. Jeremiah Brown was about to end it. The click of the band room door shutting behind Brigidi and Kevin was a sound of finality. For Jeremiah, it was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping, severing the last thread of hope she'd harbored for a peaceful existence at Northgate High. She pushed herself off the cold metal of the lockers, her movements stiff robotic. The initial shock, that hot, sickening wave of betrayal, was already beginning to recede, replaced by something far more dangerous and unnatural glacial calm. It was a state of mind she recognized from the most intense moments of her training, a hyper-focused clarity known as zanshin, where emotion is stripped away, leaving only pure awareness. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was no longer a fire threatening to consume her. It was now fuel being channeled and compressed into a core of diamond-hard resolve. She walked away from the music wing, not in retreat, but in a strategic repositioning. The enemy, who had been a shadowy force of whispers and inconvenient accidents, now had a face. Two faces, in fact. One was the open malice of Brigidi Peterson. The other, far more insidious, was the smiling cowardice of Kevin Miller. The rules of engagement had been defined. For the next 2 days, Jeremiah became a ghost in the hallways. She moved with an eerie silence, her presence felt but never truly met. Her eyes, once guarded, were now like polished obsidian, reflecting everything but revealing nothing. This new demeanor was a weapon Brigidi's arsenal had no defense against. Taunts were met with an unnerving placidity. A deliberate trip in the cafeteria resulted in Jeremiah catching her balance, with a dancer's grace offering not a flicker of anger, before walking on, leaving the bully looking foolish and juvenile. Her silent treatment of Kevin was a masterclass in psychological warfare. In AP chemistry, he tried to slide into the seat next to her, his face a miserable portrait of guilt. Jeremiah, can we just talk for a second? He began, his voice pleading. Jeremiah simply picked up her textbook and lab manual, turned her back to him without a word, and moved to an empty station on the other side of the room. The entire class watched as he sat there exposed and alone, his friendly guy persona crumbling under the weight of her silent judgment. He had been rendered invisible, and for someone who thrived on social acceptance, it was a punishment worse than any shouted accusation. This icy indifference infuriated Brigidi. She needed a reaction. She thrived on tears, on anger, on fear. Jeremiah's composure was a denial of her power, a profound insult to her dominance. In her mind, Jeremiah's stoicism was not strength, but a prelude to a complete breakdown, and she became obsessed with triggering it. The final public humiliation had to be overwhelming, an event so crushing it would shatter Jeremiah's spirit for all to see. At home, the cracks in Jeremiah's carefully constructed facade were beginning to show. Her mother Maria would watch with a worried frown as Jeremiah mechanically pushed food around her plate at dinner, her eyes distant. She found her daughter's homework untouched, her room perpetually dark. "Is everything okay, Mia?" Maria would ask, her voice soft with concern, using the affectionate Spanish term from her own childhood. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." Jeremiah would reply, the words a hollow echo. It was her father who finally broke through the wall. One evening, he found her in the living room, staring blankly at the dark screen of the television. He didn't speak at first. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 steaming mugs of the chamomile tea they often shared after her late-night training sessions. He handed one to her and sat in the armchair opposite, the silence between them, comfortable, patient. Finally, he spoke. "Talk to me, Geordie." And the dam broke. Not in a flood of tears, but in a steady, controlled release of information. She told him everything, her voice low, and even detailing the relentless campaign of microaggressions, the calculated cruelty, and the final devastating betrayal of hearing Kevin's voice colluding with Brigitte. She laid out the facts like a strategist, briefing her commander, connecting the dots between Brigitte's actions, her father's position on the school board, and the teacher's palpable fear. David Brown listened, his face a mask of stone, but inside a storm of paternal rage was brewing. He was a logical man, a software architect who built worlds from code and reason, but this was an attack on his child, and his first instinct was primal. "I'm calling Principal Thompson first thing in the morning," he said the moment she finished, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "We are going to the superintendent. We will file a formal complaint. Robert Peterson's position doesn't make his daughter immune to consequences." "Done, no, Dad," Jeremiah said, looking up, and for the first time in days, her eyes were fully alive, burning with a cold fire. "Please don't. Not yet. Jeremiah, this has gone too far. We can't let them do this to you." "And we won't," she countered, her strategic mind now fully engaged. "But think about it. If you call what happens, it becomes my word against the daughter of the head of the school board. They'll call me oversensitive. They'll say I'm the one having trouble adjusting. They'll interview Kevin and he'll lie to protect himself and his family's business interests. Mr. Davies will claim he saw nothing. They will close ranks, Dad. They'll twist this whole thing around until I look like the aggressor, the violent black girl who can't handle a civilized environment. I've seen it happen before. We can't win that fight. Not in an office." David looked at his daughter and saw not just a hurt teenager, but a clear-eyed analyst who understood the battlefield better than he did. The bitter truth of her words settled heavily in his gut. "So what's the alternative?" he asked, his voice laced with frustration. "We just let her get away with it. Sensei Tanaka taught us that the best defense is one your opponent never sees coming." Jeremiah said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He also said, "Never seek a fight, but always be prepared to finish one." Brigitte isn't going to stop. Her ego won't let her. She needs a public victory to reestablish her dominance. She's going to plan something bigger, something out in the open. A knot of dread tightened in David's stomach. He understood where this was going. "What are you saying, Jeremiah?" "I'm saying I have to let her make her move," Jeremiah stated, her gaze unwavering. "In a place where there are no excuses, no plausible deniability, where everyone can see the truth for themselves. I'm not going to start it, Dad." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "But I am going to end it." He saw the discipline he and Maria had nurtured, fused with the iron will forged in the dojo. It was a terrifying proposal, but he knew with a father's certainty that she was right. He trusted her training. More than that, he trusted her character. He nodded slowly. "Okay, Geordie. But you call me the second you need me. The very second." Brigitte's plan coalesced around the biggest social event of the fall semester, the Friday night rivalry football game against the neighboring town of Westwood. The entire school and much of the town would be there. The energy would be high, the supervision thin. The student parking lot after the game was the perfect stage, dimly lit, chaotic, and filled with a built-in audience of departing students. She held a war council in the senior lounge gathering her forces. Heather and Tiffany were as always eager participants. For muscle, she enlisted Chad and Derek, two senior linemen on the football team, who moved through the school with the dull-witted arrogance of oversized predators. They were easily swayed by the promise of some fun and the chance to impress Brigidi. Kevin Miller heard the plan whispered between classes. A cold sweat broke out on his skin. This wasn't a spilled drink or a ruined lab report. This was a planned physical confrontation. His conscience screamed at him to do something to warn Jeremiah. But the thought of it paralyzed him. How could he possibly approach her? What would he even say? The specter of Brigidi's wrath and her father's influence loomed large. He rationalized his inaction with a familiar lie, he told himself. It probably won't be that bad. They'll just scare her a little. I'll go, just to make sure things don't get too out of hand. It was the final pathetic plea of a boy trying to convince himself he wasn't a complete coward, even as he chose the coward's path. Friday night arrived, the air crisp with autumn and thick with anticipation. The stadium lights cut a brilliant swath through the darkness, illuminating the roaring crowd. Northgate won in a nail-biting finish, and the victorious energy was electric as thousands of students poured out of the stands. Jeremiah had attended the game, but she hadn't watched a single play. She was in a state of heightened awareness, her senses cataloging the environment. She felt the vibrations of the crowd through the soles of her feet. She noted the exit points, the placement of the lights, the flow of people. When the game ended, she didn't join the main throng heading for the brightly lit front gates. Instead, she deliberately took a longer route toward the sprawling shadowed expanse of the student parking lot, toward the section where her family's sedan was parked beneath a flickering sodium lamp. Her gait was calm, her breathing even. This was her kata. The world around her was a dojo, and she was moving through a preordained sequence. She heard the footsteps behind her, too many too heavy to be casual. She heard the low, mocking laughter. She didn't need to turn around. She had reached her car. She stopped, keys in hand, and stood facing the driver's side door, presenting her back as deliberate bait. She centered her weight and waited. They fanned out behind her, a predator pack, forming a semicircle to cut off any escape. Brigidi stood in the center, flanked by Chad and Derek. Heather and Tiffany hovered on the edges, their faces alight with vicious glee. And further back, half hidden by a large SUV, was Kevin, a pale, miserable ghost about to witness the consequences of his choices. Well, well, look what we have here. Brigidi's voice cut through the air, sharp and smug. All alone in the dark, nowhere to run, new girl. Jeremiah remained silent, her posture relaxed but coiled with potential energy. Her eyes weren't on Brigidi. They were reflected in the car's window, scanning the entire group behind her. Cat got your tongue, Brigidi taunted, taking a step closer, enjoying the feeling of power. I heard you were telling people I spilled milk on you on purpose, spreading nasty rumors. That's not very nice. I haven't said a word about you, Brigidi, Jeremiah replied, her voice steady and clear. It carried in the still night air, devoid of the fear they expected. Their anticipation for tears was met with unnerving composure. Liar! Tiffany shrieked, playing her part. Chad, deciding it was time for the physical portion of the show to begin, lumbered forward. He was used to people cringing away from him. You should learn to show some respect, he grunted and shoved Jeremiah hard between the shoulder blades. It was a brutish, clumsy push meant to send her stumbling into the side of her car. But it was like shoving a boulder. Jeremiah's training screamed through her muscle memory. Instead of resisting, her body yielded for a microsecond, absorbing and redirecting the force through her stance. Her feet barely shifted, but her center of gravity remained perfectly intact. Chad, expecting a different reaction, found himself overextended and stumbled forward a half step, looking more foolish than intimidating. He blinked, confused by the physics of it. Brigidi's face tightened. Her grand show was falling flat. She needed to escalate to break through Jeremiah's infuriating calm. She stalked forward until she was inches from Jeremiah's face, her own contorted with a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You know what your problem is, she sneered, her voice dropping into a low, vicious hiss. You think you can just come here to our school with your attitude. You people are all the same. You think you're entitled to everything. The air went still. The words dripping with the poison of generations of bigotry hung in the air. It was no longer just bullying. It was a line drawn in the sand. It was the final provocation. This was the moment Sensei Tanaka had prepared her for. The conflict she did not start but was now obligated to finish. Jeremiah slowly turned her head, her calm expression finally gone, replaced by something cold and absolute. "You need to back up, Brigitte," she said, her voice dropping an octave into a tone that was not a request, but a command. Brigitte, high on her own venom, laughed aloud. "Or what you're gonna cry to your daddy." She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wild with power. She pointed a finger at Jeremiah and gave the order. "Teach her a lesson." Chad and Derek grinned, cracking their knuckles as they closed in. Chad reached out a massive hand to grab Jeremiah's shoulder. The world seemed to slow down. As Chad's hand lunged, Jeremiah exploded into motion. It was not the movement of anger, but of pure, devastating efficiency. Her left hand shot up in a perfect rising block age, not just stopping his arm, but deflecting its momentum upward and away from her body. In the same fluid rotational movement, she pivoted on the ball of her back foot. Her right palm, open and hard as a brick, struck the side of Chad's thick neck, connecting precisely with the vagus nerve. It wasn't a punch. It was a neurological shutdown. Chad's eyes flew wide open in shock, a grunt of pained surprise escaping his lips. His arm went limp, his entire right side tingling with fire, and he staggered backward, collapsing to one knee, completely incapacitated. Derek, seeing his friend drop, let out an enraged roar and swung a wild looping haymaker, putting all of his 250 pounds behind it. To Jeremiah, the punch was a telegraphed, slow-motion arc. She didn't retreat. She moved into it, stepping inside the range of the punch as it whistled harmlessly past her head. Her body was already coiled. As she moved, her right elbow drove upward in a short, brutal arc, sinking deep into Derek's solar plexus. The impact was absolute. The air evacuated Derek's lungs in a single desperate whoosh. His eyes bulged and he folded in half like a cheap lawn chair, clutching his stomach, his mind capable of nothing but a singular agonizing thought: breathe. 2 seconds, 2 movements. The two enforcers were neutralized. Heather and Tiffany let out twin screams of pure terror, scrambling backward and tripping over each other to get away. Brigitte stood frozen, her jaw hanging open, her carefully constructed world shattered in an instant. The smugness, the cruelty, the confidence, it all evaporated, leaving only a raw, uncomprehending horror. Jeremiah slowly straightened up, her breathing steady. She turned her head and fixed her gaze on Brigitte. She took one deliberate step forward. Brigitte flinched as if she'd been struck and stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet and landing in a pathetic heap on the cold asphalt. She looked up at Jeremiah, who now stood over her, a figure of absolute authority. "It's over, Brigitte," Jeremiah said, her voice resonating with a power they had never imagined. "The game is done." Her gaze then shifted, cutting through the darkness to the edge of the scene. It landed on Kevin. He was staring, his face a bloodless mask of disbelief, his mind reeling. He looked from the two groaning athletes on the ground to the terrified girls to Brigitte, the fallen queen. And then his eyes met Jeremiah's. In her gaze there was no victory, no triumph. There was only the cold, hard weight of judgment. And a few yards away, shielded by the back of a pickup truck, a freshman named Leo held his phone perfectly steady, his thumb hovering over the stop record button. The small red light on his screen was a silent, blinking witness. The truth had just been captured, and it was about to be set free. The taillights of Jeremiah's sedan disappeared around the corner, leaving a vacuum of sound and motion in the parking lot. For a few drawn-out seconds, the only noises were the ragged, painful gasps of Derek trying to force air back into his lungs, and Chad's low groans as he shakily pushed himself up from the asphalt. The small crowd of students, drawn by the promise of a spectacle, stood frozen in a state of collective shock. They had come expecting to see a lamb sacrificed. Instead, they had witnessed a wolf unmask itself as a dragon. Heather and Tiffany were the first to break the spell. Their faces, once twisted in cruel anticipation, were now pale masks of terror. They looked at the wheezing football players, then at the spot where Brigitte sat still dumbfounded on the ground, and a dawning animal realization took hold. They were standing on the losing side. Without a word to each other, they scurried away, melting back into the shadows of the parking lot like the scavengers they were. Their loyalty, it was now clear, was only to power, and power had just dramatically changed hands. Kevin Miller remained rooted to his spot, a solitary island in the sea of dispersing students. The scene replayed in his mind in a sickening loop: Chad's shove, Brigitte's venomous words, and then the shocking, elegant explosion of controlled force from Jeremiah. But the image that burned brightest was the final look she had given him. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was a cold, searing contempt that had assessed his character and found it utterly worthless. He felt a profound hollowness in his chest, the feeling of a debt being called due that he had no way to pay. As the crowd thinned, the freshman who had been recording the incident lowered his phone, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a small, quiet boy named Leo, and he'd been on the receiving end of Chad's casual shoves more than once. He had started filming out of a morbid fear, but as he watched Jeremiah defend herself, something else took over: a surge of righteous vindication. He looked at the video he had captured. It was clear. It was undeniable. He knew what he had to do. He retreated to the safety of his parents' waiting car, and with trembling fingers, he created a burner email account and sent the video file to a few key student group chats. He titled it simply, "Northgate Parking Lot, Friday Night." He hit send, unleashing a digital truth bomb into the heart of the school's social ecosystem. By Saturday morning, the video was no longer just a file, it was a phenomenon. It had been retitled by others, "Northgate Queen, B Gets Schooled, Karate Girl vs. Jocks," and was being mirrored, shared, and commented on at a furious pace. The audio was crystal clear. Brigitte's ugly racist slur echoed through phone speakers across the town. At the Brown residence, the weekend was a strange mix of tension and release. Jeremiah had walked in, placed her keys on the counter, and finally told her parents. It happened. David and Maria listened, their faces etched with worry as she recounted the event with the same detached calm she'd shown in the parking lot. Then a text message arrived from one of the few classmates who had shown her kindness. It was a link to the video. The three of them huddled around David's tablet and watched. Maria's hand flew to her mouth in horror when she saw the boys move in. David's jaw tightened into a line of steel. But as they watched their daughter move with a grace and power they had only ever seen in the controlled environment of a dojo, their fear was replaced by a wave of awe and fierce pride. They weren't watching a victim. They were watching a warrior. "My God, Jeremiah," Maria whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "You were incredible." David wrapped a powerful arm around his daughter's shoulders. "You did everything Sensei Tanaka taught you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You protected yourself. You did not start it, but you finished it. I've never been more proud of you." For the first time in weeks, Jeremiah felt the icy knot in her stomach begin to melt, replaced by the warm, solid foundation of her family's love. Meanwhile, at the opulent Peterson estate, the atmosphere was one of theatrical fury and denial. Brigitte had stormed home, weaving a wild, tearful tale of being brutally attacked and ambushed by that violent girl. Robert Peterson, a man for whom every problem could be solved with a threat or a check, immediately went into attack mode. He spent all of Saturday on the phone bellowing at the police chief, a personal friend leaving irate voicemails for Principal Thompson, and planning his strategy to have Jeremiah expelled and charged. He was so insulated by his own power that the idea of a different version of events was inconceivable. It wasn't until his son, a college student home for the weekend, silently showed him the video on his phone that Robert Peterson's tirade came to a sputtering halt. He watched it once, then twice, his face shifting through a kaleidoscope of emotions, from disbelief to confusion, to the sickening realization that the audio was clear, and finally to a pale, cold fury. The problem wasn't the assault. The problem was that there was proof. Monday morning at Northgate High felt like the air before a thunderstorm. The usual chaotic energy of the hallways was replaced by a low, expectant hum. When Brigitte Peterson walked through the main doors, a wave of silence radiated outward from her. Students stopped talking mid-sentence. Heads turned, eyes followed her. But no one smiled or waved. The sea of faces that used to part for her in reverence now parted in condemnation. Her power, built on the flimsy scaffolding of fear and popularity, had been publicly demolished. She was no longer a queen, she was a spectacle. The meeting in Principal Thompson's office was scheduled for 9 a.m. Mr. Thompson, a veteran educator who had long grown weary of Robert Peterson's overbearing influence, sat behind his desk, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying a grim resolve. Jeremiah and her parents sat on one side of the office, a portrait of quiet dignity. On the other side sat Brigitte, looking sullen and defiant, and her father, his expensive suit, unable to conceal the rage rolling off him in waves. "This is an outrage," Mr. Peterson began, dispensing with any pretense of civility. "My daughter and her friends were viciously assaulted by this student. I have already spoken to my lawyers. I expect her immediate expulsion, and frankly, Principal Thompson, I am shocked you haven't already taken action." Mr. Thompson held up a hand, his calmness a stark contrast to Peterson's blustering. "Robert, thank you for your perspective. We have to follow procedure here, which means hearing from all parties involved." He turned his kind, tired eyes to Jeremiah. "Jeremiah, I know this is difficult. Would you like to tell me what happened from your point of view?" Before Jeremiah could formulate a response, David Brown leaned forward and placed his tablet on the polished surface of the principal's desk. "Perhaps this will clarify the sequence of events, Principal Thompson," he said, his voice steady and firm. "I believe it provides all the context you'll need." He pressed play. The sharp, clear audio of the video filled the tense office. Robert Peterson's face was a study in disintegration. His arrogant certainty began to crumble as he heard his daughter's taunts. It fractured when he saw the blatant shove from Chad. It shattered into a million pieces when he heard his own child's voice filled with such ugly hatred spit out the racist diatribe. He watched ashen-faced as his daughter ordered the boys to attack, and then watched the swift, undeniable act of self-defense that followed. The entire foundation of his argument, his threats, his power, turned to dust before his eyes. Brigitte shrank in her chair, refusing to look at the screen, her face burning with a shame that was for once genuine. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair and folded his hands, looking directly at the shell-shocked Robert Peterson. "Well," the principal said, his voice now carrying a new weight of authority, "that certainly provides context. The karma that followed was not a single event, but a cascade, a systematic dismantling of a corrupt and toxic structure. Brigitte was hit with a 2-week suspension for bullying, racial harassment, and inciting violence. But this official punishment paled in comparison to her social execution. When she returned, she was utterly alone. Heather and Tiffany would literally cross the hallway to avoid her. Her ex-boyfriend wouldn't meet her gaze. The power she had wielded was gone, and she discovered she had no real friends, only followers who had now abandoned her. She was forced to confront the hollow reality of who she was, without her father's name and a manufactured reputation. The karma for Chad and Derek was swift and public. The football coach, a hard-nosed man who valued discipline above all, called them into his office. He didn't yell. He simply played the video, then made them look at the team's code of conduct, which they had signed. They were suspended from the team for the remainder of the season and stripped of any leadership roles. The humiliation of being taken down so easily was compounded by the loss of respect from their teammates, who now saw them not as tough guys, but as foolish bullies. The most profound and devastating karma was reserved for Mr. Robert Peterson. His attempt to steamroll the principal and the school system backfired catastrophically. The video, now in the hands of the local news, became a major story. The school board was inundated with calls and emails from furious parents. An emergency meeting was convened, but it was a formality. Faced with the undeniable evidence and the complete loss of trust from the community and his peers, he was given a choice: resign from the board immediately or be publicly voted out in disgrace. His resignation was tendered the next morning. His empire of influence within the town's educational system had crumbled to nothing. Kevin Miller received no official punishment, but his sentence was in many ways the most enduring. He lived in a purgatory of his own making, haunted by Jeremiah's look of contempt. Finally, after a week of torment, he gathered the courage to face her. He found her by her locker after school, packing her bag. "Jeremiah, he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I am so sorry. There's no excuse. I was a coward. I was scared of her and what her dad could do to my family's business. But that doesn't matter. What I did, lying to you, being a part of it, it was unforgivable." His apology was a raw, desperate plea for absolution. Jeremiah finished packing her bag and turned to face him fully. Her expression was not angry, but weary, as if she were speaking to a child. "You're right, Kevin," she said, her voice holding the finality of a judge's gavel. "It was unforgivable. Your apology isn't for me. It doesn't fix anything. It's for you. The only person you have to figure out how to live with is yourself." She looked him directly in the eye, delivering the final crushing blow. "Your karma isn't a suspension or public shame. It's knowing that for the rest of your life, you'll know that when you had a choice between doing what was right and what was easy, you chose easy. Good luck with that." She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the empty hallway, consumed by the crushing weight of a truth from which there was no escape. The incident became a catalyst for real change at Northgate High. The newly energized school board, with David Brown now taking an active advisory role, implemented a comprehensive zero-tolerance anti-bullying policy. Teachers, including a formerly reprimanded Mr. Davies, underwent new training. The culture of fear was replaced by one of accountability. Jeremiah never spoke of the incident again. She didn't have to. She was no longer just the new girl. She was Jeremiah. She joined the track team, her powerful legs eating up the cinder track, and found a small traditional dojo in the next town over, where she once again felt the comfort of the worn wooden floor and the familiar snap of a clean white jai. She made real friends, drawn to her quiet confidence and unwavering integrity. She had walked into Northgate a target, but through her ordeal she had become a titan, proving that true strength is not the power to intimidate, but the courage to stand firm in your own truth, immovable and unbreakable. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a girl who knew karate. It was a story about the nature of true strength versus the illusion of power. Bridget E. Peterson's power was a house of cards built on fear, influence, and cruelty. It was loud, arrogant, and ultimately fragile. Jeremiah Brown's strength was a deep-rooted oak tree, cultivated in silence through discipline, respect, and an unshakable sense of self. When the storm came, the house of cards was blown away, and the tree was all that remained standing. The real karma wasn't the physical defeat in the parking lot. It was the unavoidable truth captured on video for all to see that dismantled a toxic hierarchy from the top down. It's a powerful reminder that bullies only have the power we give them, and sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should listen to the most. Thank you for listening to this story. If you were on the edge of your seat and believe in the power of standing up for what's right, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of justice and empowerment. Let us know in the comments, what's the most satisfying moment of karma you've ever witnessed? We'd love to hear your stories.